This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. This has been another important day for the history books. In Washington today, the Senate and the House of Representatives began debating one of the most fundamental responsibilities of Congress, the right to declare war. There is nothing President Bush would like more than resounding support for going to war if the Iraqis are not out of Kuwait by next week. No one doubts the President can start the war, but there are certainly doubts in Congress about the timing at the very least. On Capitol Hill tonight, ABC's Jim Wooten.
Sometimes it's hard to see history actually being made. Nevertheless, this was not just another day in Congress.
So today, the Senate undertakes a solemn constitutional responsibility.
Mitchell, the Democratic leader, introduced a resolution challenging the president's authority to order an attack on Iraq by himself and the wisdom of doing so now.
The grave decision for war is being made prematurely.
Wait, he and a parade of his fellow Democrats argued. Nunn, Leahy, Simon, Kennedy, Biden.
What's the hurry for war? What's the hurry?
But the Republican leader asked how long the country should wait.
30 days, 30 months, 30 years. And so I'm not certain what kind of a signal that sent, but it seemed to me it takes Saddam Hussein off the hook.
What's required, Dole argued, and so did Republicans Danforth and D'Amato, is a clear message to Baghdad that America speaks with one clear voice. Today's most passionate voice had not been heard before in the Senate. Freshman Democrat Wellstone of Minnesota, his very first words on the Senate floor.
The fathers and mothers of young men and women from Minnesota who are now in the Persian Gulf have not forgotten what war means in personal terms, and we must not forget either.
Republicans have yet to offer or even draft a resolution of their own. It's not clear why, but they may be trying to devise a version that matches the UN resolution, pleases the president, and has broad support in the Senate. That won't be easy. Jim Wooten, ABC News, Capitol Hill.
There was some feeling that the breakdown of talks in Geneva yesterday between the U.S. and Iraq might make Mr. Bush's job in Congress easier. But Mr. Bush and his aides were working hard today to make sure he is not embarrassed on Capitol Hill. At the White House tonight, ABC's Britt Hume.
The president, relaxed but deeply pessimistic that diplomacy can work, was busy today trying to make the war threat more credible by getting Congress behind it. He met with senators whose support he's counting on. They later reported that he would be satisfied with even the narrowest vote for a resolution authorizing force.
The president made the comment again that if it's an affirmative vote, he wants it. In other words, he's not looking for 70 or 80 votes. 51 will be good enough.
Republican Whip Simpson said the meeting also indicated the president's allies can block by filibuster any resolution that doesn't give Mr. Bush the authority he wants.
There are obviously going to be enough people there in both parties to prevent the passage of any kind of resolution which is not going to be most helpful to the president. It's right down to that.
Defense Secretary Cheney was on Capitol Hill trying to persuade former congressional colleagues to support a war authorization. In addition, this letter to Congress from CIA Director Webster surfaced today. It says sanctions, while hurting, are unlikely to get Iraq out of Kuwait within a year. Senators at the White House today said that assessment could be critical, since Webster only weeks ago had seemed so optimistic about sanctions.
His subsequent conclusion about a month later or whatever it has been would be very relevant, I believe, particularly in the minds of those who believe that all we need to do is give time for sanctions to work.
So the president seemed to move closer to getting the congressional authorization he wants. One reason he may not care much whether it's by a small margin or large is that he recognizes that if it comes to war, he, not Congress, will get the credit or the blame. Britt Hume, ABC News, the White House.
The next diplomatic move appears to be up to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Javier Pérez de Cuélllar. He is on his way from New York to Paris this evening, and from there to Baghdad for a meeting with Saddam Hussein on Saturday. Since nothing the U.S. has tried directly has worked, Mr. de Cuélllar will try an international approach. Here's our national security correspondent, John McCarthy.
The proposal Pérez de Cuélllar is carrying to Baghdad offers to send a United Nations transition force to Kuwait if Saddam Hussein will agree to get out. The force would not include any troops from the U.S., Saudi Arabia, or any of the other coalition countries that oppose Iraq. Though Secretary Baker said today he supports the mission of Pérez de Cuélllar, U.S. officials give it little chance of success. Baker still does hold out some hope that yesterday's discouraging meeting with Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz will have an impact on Saddam Hussein's thinking once he has been briefed by his foreign minister.
I continue to believe that peace is possible. We certainly continue to strongly prefer a peaceful and political solution.
Last night, Baker had a long phone conversation with Soviet Foreign Minister Shevardnadze, describing the talks with Tariq Aziz and the need for more pressure. Shevardnadze said the Soviets would send Saddam Hussein another warning, one designed to underscore the immense destructive potential of the weapons and troops that are now arrayed against him. Now in Saudi Arabia, Baker is requesting billions of dollars more to support American forces in the Gulf. He is also asking for Saudi advice on how soon the fighting should start if Iraq fails to back down. One major concern for the Bush administration is what is known as the Israeli factor. Earlier, America's Arab coalition partners secretly assured Baker that if Israel was attacked first and then responded, Arab forces would fight in Kuwait even if Israel was then fighting on the same side. Now Baker wants assurances that nothing has changed. John McWethy, ABC News, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia.
The failure of the U.S. and Iraq to reach any common ground at those meetings in Geneva yesterday certainly raised the level of pessimism about a diplomatic solution. 86% of the people that our polling unit spoke to overnight now believe there will be war. 72% thought so last weekend. People believe in using force if it's necessary, but we do find people supporting every possible means to avoid the fighting. 79% think the U.S. should have further talks with Iraq, and 66% of those our polling unit spoke with favor that international conference on the Arab-Israeli issue, which the president says would only reward Iraqi aggression. In a moment, our report from Baghdad tonight has the diplomats prepare to leave, and then Arab Americans who resent being singled out for attention by the FBI. And on the American agenda, keeping rapists from raping again.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings, brought to you by Fleischmann's Margarine.
Throughout the Middle East today, there is a new sense of urgency among foreign nationals that now is the time to get out of the region. First, Iraq. Today, the White House urged all Americans, including journalists, to leave. The U.S. does not plan to break off diplomatic relations, but the U.S. embassy will be vacated. In Baghdad, ABC's Gary Shepard.
Foreign diplomats were packing up and leaving Baghdad today as the threat of war continued to grow. The British ambassador organized a convoy of half a dozen vehicles and headed for the Jordanian border, 300 miles to the west. The Germans have already departed. The Australians are leaving before dawn tomorrow.
Down, down, Bush! Down, down, Bush!
About 100 Iraqi demonstrators staged a protest at the U.S. Embassy today, chanting "Down, down, Bush" and "Long live Saddam Hussein." Inside, the handful of Americans who are still here were preparing to pull out on Saturday. The ranking U.S. diplomat saying he's not worried about violence.
I've been assured since August 6th by the president of Iraq of my own personal security and of the security of my staff here.
The State Department has chartered a plane to carry the last remaining American diplomats out of here on Saturday morning.
Iraqi citizens are not permitted to leave the country, even if there is a war. Many waited in long lines today to stockpile gasoline so they can evacuate the capital quickly. On television tonight, there were civil defense announcements explaining how to find bomb shelters in case of an air raid. Gary Shepard, ABC News, Baghdad.
There is none of the same sense of urgency in Saudi Arabia. 5 months ago, the Saudis were terrified they would be invaded. ABC's Linda Fatilla reports tonight they are almost calm and confident.
The weekly air raid drill provokes little response. At civil defense centers, boxes of gas masks go untouched. And on the local news, there have been no official warnings. On the streets, many Saudis say that if the U.S.-led multinational force does not deter Iraqi missiles, Allah will.
I haven't really been with anybody who's been nervous about what's going to happen, because they're all Muslims. You know, they're good faith coming from within as protecting them.
That faith is not shared by hundreds of thousands of foreigners working in the oil-rich eastern province. Buses leaving town are filled. All flights out after the 12th are booked.
We're concerned that if something happens, we won't be able to get a flight out. We just want to be safe.
But for most Saudi civilians, the danger seems far away. Some believe Iraq's missiles cannot reach their cities, and some expect the huge Allied force to protect them. Linda Patillo, ABC News, Dhahran, Saudi Arabia.
The citizens of Israel are under no illusions about how war in the Middle East can get out of control. Tel Aviv is closer to Iraq than is the capital of Saudi Arabia, and Saddam Hussein has threatened any number of times that Israel would be the first target in the event of war. ABC's Dean Reynolds is there.
In Jerusalem tonight, young men inducted into Israel's elite paratrooper unit. The pride of their country and their families, they may soon be seeing action. Anxiety is growing here that war is now inevitable. People are stocking up on canned foods, finally heeding calls to pick up their gas masks, and taping their windows against chemical attack. With all the bad news coming out of Geneva, the government here took pains today to guard against public panic. Defense Minister Ahrens told Israelis to listen for instructions on the radio, to disregard the rumor mill. Prime Minister Shamir told a television audience Iraq's threats to attack don't trouble him, but then came a videotaped guide with subtitles on such things as the best way to protect against chemical burns. The fear of war has been driving about 5,000 foreigners a day from Israel for the past week. Almost all flights out have been booked through January 15th. Dean Reynolds, ABC News, Tel Aviv.
Right.